Hey everybody, this is Mr. Moppin coming at you with a APUSH video focusing in on topic 5.10, taking a look at Reconstruction. Excuse me. Previously, we had started to talk about the initial plans of Reconstruction going from Lincoln's 10% plan to what's going to be Johnson's 10% plus plan. The general gist being, of course, that the White House plans were pretty lenient in terms of demands on the southern states to be able to come back into the Union and wanted to have rapidity in terms of, kind of healing the wounds from the past. However, there are going to be many Republicans in Congress that are going to become known as the Radical Republicans. They're going to take issue with the idea of a fast, quick, swift Reconstruction process. The concern that they had was that, if we have a simple, easy Reconstruction process, then the South will pretty much learn nothing from the experience of the Civil War. That black, freed Americans will not have anything but freedom, no citizenship, no voting rights, no protection of the law, none of that kind of stuff. And that, as we were already starting to see by this point, by 1866, we were starting to, or at least in the fall of 1865, that we were starting to see former members of the Confederacy coming back to Congress, ready to take back their seats. And so, there was real concern that the South was not really changing from what it was before. And one example of this is going to be the creation of these things called black codes. Remember, just because slavery is now ended in the South doesn't mean that the prevailing attitudes of whites down there are going to be changed. And so the idea being is that these are folks that believe that people of color, black Americans, freedmen, need to remain at the very bottom of the socioeconomic ladder of the South. And so the idea being is that if you can't enslave black people, you can restrict their freedom as much as possible. And that's where these black codes, so-called black codes, come in. These are basically state and local laws and ordinances that are going to specifically target black people in terms of freedom. So, for example, laws that may say that a black person may not speak to a white woman unless spoken to first. Laws such as if you are black that you must be indoors by sunset. A very common one was Anti-Vagrancy Laws targeting black Americans. The idea being is that if you were black, you had to be employed. That it was a crime to not be employed as a black person. And so the general concept is that, if you have these mandatory anti-vagrancy laws and you keep black Americans working at all times and you keep black Americans from having any kind of personal freedom, that in essence you're going to keep the gist of what the slave status was, even though slavery as an institution is technically now abolished. And so you are seeing, if you are black, that really not much has changed so far. If you are black, for example, and you are being forced by law to be employed, you have to quickly find a job, and chances are you are not educated, you don't own property, your experience has been a laborer, and chances are you're going to quickly take those kinds of jobs. And many of these former slaves that had been working on plantations before the Civil War are going to find themselves right back where they were, back working on plantations. Now, not technically as slaves, but as tenant farmers, sharecroppers, etc. And we'll get more into what that means a little bit later. But yeah, the basic idea is that, not changing very much. And, if we're looking at President Johnson's view on it, President Johnson had no problem at all with it. Remember, President Johnson absolutely believed that blacks were inferior and that blacks should be at the very bottom of society. And so, yeah, Johnson's going to go right along with it. So this is going to be another example of a growing rift between President Johnson, and who's a Democrat, Southern Democrat, remember, and the Northern Republican radicals in Congress. Remember, these Northern Radical Republicans were wanting to kind of revolutionize the South, remake the South to some degree in the North's image. And that included, of course, the Freedmen's Bureau, which provided education and resources to former slaves. President Johnson hated the Freedmen's Bureau. He believed that it was a waste of money, that it would promote corruption, though the Freedmen's Bureau did have some issues with corruption as much as, other parts of the federal government did for sure back then. But, that being said, Johnson is going to veto a reauthorization of the Freedmen's Bureau in 1866. We also saw Congress pass what is going to be the Civil Rights Act of 1866, which will create some basic civil protections for former slaves. Johnson's going to veto that. So you can kind of see here, here are, more shots being fired at the different branches, at each other. Johnson is saying that he's basically not going to lift a finger to help former slaves have opportunities in the post-war South. He is not interested in it at all. He doesn't believe the federal government has the authority to do that, and so he's going to stand in the way of it. And this is going to lead to Congress taking steps that they've never taken before. For the first time in American history, we're going to see Congress override presidential vetoes, and we're going to see the Civil Rights Act of 1866 get overridden and passed into law. We're going to see the Freedmen's Bureau be reauthorized. So, this is very interesting. Congress and the president are basically at war now over the fate of Reconstruction. Johnson believes that he is the defender of the Constitution, that the federal government is intruding on states' rights. In other words, he is saying that states have a right to keep black Americans in some degree of social subservience. And Congress is saying no, that the federal government has a responsibility to try to make up for the past institution of slavery, to give black Americans a fighting chance to be successful in the future. So, we definitely see war now, between President Johnson and Congress. And this is going to help push Republicans to move even further in trying to reshape the South. Now, from a Southern white Democrat perspective, this is seen as vengeful and, trying to destroy what it means to be the South. From the Northern Republican perspective, it was a simple matter of doing what they believed was morally right. That if you're going to reintegrate these former Confederate rebel states into the Union, they need to have the same values as the rest of the Union. And that included redesigning citizenship. Part of what the radical Republicans in Congress are going to be passing is what's called the 14th Amendment. And this, in many respects, is going to be perhaps the most significant amendment to the Constitution other than maybe the First Amendment. This is going to do a number of things. It provides equal protection to the law, which is really the foundation for civil rights. It is going to create rules in terms of banning those that had a leadership role in the Confederacy from being able to ever vote again and hold political office. But most importantly, at least at this stage, is the Citizenship Clause and the Privileges and Immunities Clause of the 14th Amendment, which is going to basically state that if you are born on American soil, regardless of conditions, you are an American citizen. So in other words, if you are a former slave, assuming you were born on American soil, doesn't matter the circumstances, you're an American citizen. And why is that important? Well, the 14th Amendment also includes the provision that if somebody is a citizen, states cannot deny them rights that you're entitled to as a citizen. So, in other words, if you are a citizen as a former slave, Southern state governments cannot take the rights of being a citizen away from you. And that includes, all your constitutional protections. So this is a very bold step by Congress saying, we are not simply content with just abolishing slavery. We are demanding that Southern states recognize black Americans as fellow citizens with all the rights and privileges that go along with it. Now, of course, Southern whites, Democrats, are not going to be too happy with this idea, because they believe that this is going to be the next step in what they think will be a complete and total revolution in their states along racial lines. Take a look at this chart right here, which shows the racial breakdown of some of these southern states between whites and people of color. For some of these states, like Louisiana, Mississippi, and South Carolina, blacks are either just at about the same level of population or greater than that of whites. And so, these Southern white Democrats are just petrified that if you give black American citizenship rights, then the next step is going to be voting rights. And if black Americans get the right to vote, then it's game over. Then it's the idea that blacks will now be running these states and whites will now be the persecuted race. And it'll be a complete 180 of what they believe society should be. So this is why, this is so critical in terms of what's going to be happening. Southern white Democrats want to maintain the pre-Civil War notion of white supremacy, black inferiority, and deny black Americans any types of rights, opportunities, etc. Northern radical Republicans are going to be wanting really major systemic changes that will be, let's be honest, it would be revolutionary for sure. So the question is, where are we going to go with this? Are we going to go the president's route, which is certainly what Southern white Democrats want, or are we going to go with what Congress wants to do? And this is really going to be decided in the 1866 midterm elections. And, obviously Republicans in Congress are going to be promoting their, very, revolutionary changes that they want, especially focusing in on the 14th Amendment. Johnson's going to be going on a speaking tour known as the Swing Round the Circle, where he is going to be delivering speeches in opposition to what the Republicans in Congress were advocating and promoting his idea that the federal government must be small. It cannot intrude on what state governments want to do, that black people are only entitled to freedom and nothing else. But this Swing Around the Circle campaign for Johnson is going to be an utter disaster. On some of these occasions, he shows up drunk. At one occasion, he gets into it, arguing with the crowd. It's really embarrassing for President Johnson. And this is going to, clearly show in the results of the midterms when we see the Democrats just crushed, absolutely crushed in the congressional midterm elections. And so what does this mean? Well, it means that not only do Republicans have a majority in Congress, that we already knew that going in, but now they're going to have a supermajority in Congress. The idea being is that they now have beyond a 2/3 majority in both houses of Congress to the point now where they can, just along party lines, override anything that President Johnson vetoes. So from a legislative perspective, Johnson has been eliminated. He has been, neutered, for lack of a better term. And so Congress is now driving the bus without a doubt when it comes to Reconstruction. And if you weren't prepared for it, here it is. It is now time for radical Reconstruction. And so what Congress is now going to be dictating to the southern states is that if you want to come back into the Union, you cannot just simply follow President Johnson's plan. You now have to pass Congress's plan, which is going to be far more stringent. It's going to require that southern states create new constitutions that are going to allow for suffrage for black Americans and specific ratification of the 13th and 14th Amendments. Now, the 13th Amendment, that had not been an issue. Even President Johnson, remember, had been demanding that. But the idea of you have to ratify the 14th Amendment and your state constitutions have to allow for universal black male suffrage, that is extraordinary. And so basically, Congress is, holding a sword to the throats of the southern states, saying, listen, you will make these changes or you will never come back. So this is pretty wild. And, on top of that, when I say that, Congress has kind of put the sword to the South's throats, there's a lot to that, because we will also see as part of this the passage of the Reconstruction Acts of 1867, which will literally take these southern rebelling states and divide them up into 5 military districts, each led by a general. And these generals are going to be responsible for enforcing Reconstruction policies, including what is going to be, opportunities for protecting black citizen rights, voting, etc., etc. So, yes, it seems as if Congress has declared war again on the South, and this truly revolutionary Reconstruction is now at hand. All right, that's it for now. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.